Hello, you're listening to the TerraLex podcast, where we break down current issues and trends in the legal industry. Join us as we gain valuable insights from our member law firms across the world, as well as from the in-house counsel community and experienced professionals in their field.
Thank you for joining us today. In the invitation for this meeting, you may have noticed a quotation about change and by Alvin Toffler, who is a pretty well-known author and futurist. And he said, change is the process by which the future invades our lives. We've collectively been through some head-spinning changes recently with more to come. I don't have the ability to forecast the future with very much accuracy. I've learned that in my many years of living. But I do know for sure that one of the best ways to start understanding what you need to be thinking about for the future is to talk to the consumers of legal services, to the clients. And so we have brought together an esteemed panel of in-house counsel, and they're going to talk to us today about the challenges and opportunities that arise from the current crisis, and the changing expectations for them within their companies and how that might impact the changing expectations on outside law firms. So let's first meet our guest panelists. Many of them are very familiar faces to TerraLex, and I'll do this in alphabetical order. Ann Gonzalez is currently, and for the past 2.5 years, the in-house working as the Director of Business and Legal Affairs at NBC Universal International Television Distribution, and she focuses on distribution in Latin America. Raised right here in South Florida, she graduated from the University of Miami with a double major in political science and public relations, and went to law school at the University of Chicago. And prior to her in-house position, she practiced law at Hughes, Hubbard & Reed for 6 years, 2 years in litigation and 4 in corporate. And so she has a really great broad perspective and has walked a mile in the shoes of a lot of our panelists, both those that are in-house and those that are outside counsel. Alex O, wave Alex. Alex is a director and corporate counsel at Juno Therapeutics, which is now a Bristol Myers Squibb company. He advises the company on intellectual property matters and manages the company's IP estate. Prior to joining Juno, Alex was a partner in the technology and intellectual property group at Stoll Reeves, a TerraLex member. And while at Stoll, he served as TerraLex's member representative for Washington State, and he was co-chair of our life sciences practice group. Outside of practicing law, and I must say my salvation during this current staying at home crisis, Alex and his partner Samuel own and operate Aluel Cellars, a boutique winery in Washington State that focuses on producing wines from French and Portuguese varietals. And yes, I did buy a case and I'm making my way through it. Another very familiar face to us at TerraLex is Michael Petra-George. Michael is Vice President and General Counsel at Management and Training Corporation, a Utah-based company. And prior to joining MTC in May 2020, Michael was Vice President and shareholder at TerraLex member Parsons, Bailey & Latimer, and he practiced general commercial litigation there. While at Parsons, Michael served as chair of our TerraLex's Strategic Communications Committee and as co-chair of our International Dispute Resolution Practice Group. Michael and his wife Angela live in Salt Lake City and have 3 children. Gonzalo Rivera is currently Director of Latin America for Intellectual Property and Licensing for Bayer Group, South region, and licensing matters for the Latin America region at Bayer Group. Of note, he was responsible for developing and implementing a business model that allowed Bayer to launch their key biotechnology products in relevant countries in Latin America, such as Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Mexico. Gonzalo is one of the key team members that was responsible for securing the intellectual property protection for biotechnology products across Latin America, and for developing and implementing the strategy for the defense of Bayer's intellectual property rights. And prior to joining Bayer Group, he served as the regional law lead for Monsanto Company in Latin America. And before that, before his in-house role, he was in private practice at a TerraLex member as well, Bronze and Solace, and as a senior associate, and he represented clients throughout Latin America. So thank you for joining us, panel. We have asked our panel to be provocateurs, to challenge the status quo. And so we're going to basically describe how the current environment is affecting them and presenting unique challenges and understand how those challenges impact their changing expectations for you. So let's talk a little bit about how life has changed for you as in-house counsel. Michael, do you want to start off with that? And you are muted, so you will need to unmute yourself.
Sure, thanks, Terry. I mean, I think like a lot of us, we've had to adapt pretty quickly to new working conditions and working environments. And so our staff pretty quickly went from being 100% in the office to remote working and having to manage our meetings by Zoom and do a lot more work remotely. I would say the day-to-day work, the biggest change is just instead of the normal workflow, I now have the normal workflow plus COVID-19 emergency response issues. So that's probably been the biggest practical change. In terms of our interaction with our law firm partners, really not a ton has changed. Obviously, we can't travel at this point to have interaction with folks, but we're still having good engagement in terms of Zoom meetings and emails and getting actually a lot of what I would say is really helpful and good newsletters and things that are being blasted to sort of highlight key issues that if we haven't already thought about them, we should be thinking about, or just to give us further insight into some of the issues that we're already dealing with and thinking about. So that surge of additional help, I would say, has been pretty helpful.
We'll come back to that in a minute, to that notion of all the news and information that's being flooded on your desks and how law firms can best present that to you. But in terms of additional challenges, Anne, are you seeing anything besides some of the things that Michael mentioned?
So it's funny because in our team at work, we were in the process of implementing a, once a week, everyone can work from home. Let's see how this works. And now we're joking that we got thrown in the fire to figure it out, regardless of anything else that was going on. So the way that our office is structured, it's a relatively new building. So we have this, Google, Facebook type open concept where, and we've been in the space for 2 years now. So everyone got very used to having this open space and being able to have this free flow of ideas and really just bounce stuff off of each other. So we got used to that dynamic. And anytime we had a question, everyone was very accessible, very much present. So Microsoft Teams has actually become an intricate part of our practice because it still allows that kind of free flow of ideas and bouncing ideas off of each other. And the way that our team works, everyone really plays a part when it comes to what I need to do, which is drafting a licensing agreement. So at least that's been able to really shape our communication, and it's been a godsend. But I think, even with that tool, there's still some limits on accessibility to our team members, especially with people with families. Everyone's, working from home and people are respecting those boundaries, but sometimes we're in a time crunch, and I feel like we're balancing being sensitive to getting the job done.
Thank you. Gonzalo, what about you? Any other challenges that you're experiencing in today's environment?
Yeah, similarly to what Anne was mentioning, I mean, we were actually in the process of starting, these open space, experience at work. So started in February 1st, we started with a new layout of the office where, nobody has been keeping, a closed office. No more. There is a specific areas or neighbors areas that we have been calling, but nobody has a really specific place, to sit every day. So there is I would say that it was a new something very new to everybody, and particularly for law department, where we used to have our binders, our things, all together in our offices, and the private space in terms of how to keep confidential certain conversations, and now getting accustomed to new rules. I have to tell you that these pandemic and COVID-19 come in the middle of this. So it was a push hard, entrance, to this new flexible way, because it was part of this open space routine, was to encourage our team members, and this is also for the entire organization, was, you know, to start having flexible days. So it was established in terms of how we can accommodate between all the team members in order to establish certain days that we have to do home office. And this was something that has to be, you know, considered, you know, in a good way. So this has been pushing us, you know, as a mandatory way, you know, to start with these process. For me, in my particular situation, I have to tell you, I was not very accustomed to do home office. So this has been creating for me, you know, a new dynamics. So far, I am doing well in terms of, you know, having our internal meetings within the team once a week. So we can we have a space of 1 hour space, you know, to catch up on things that all the team is doing. And of course, you know, the agenda is, you know, exploding now with a lot of, you know, Skype meetings or Teams meetings in terms of getting with internal clients as well. With respect to the outside counsel, this has been changing also too, because it has been triggering, you know, in terms of getting more in connection with the outside firms, not only, you know, by phone, but now we are implementing these Zoom or you know, Skype meetings in terms of trying to do these virtual meetings.
So, Alex, if you want to, I don't know if you have any other challenges that are different, but at the same time, also, maybe you could talk a little bit about, are the expectations from your internal clients changing, and in what ways?
Yeah, no, I would have to echo a lot of the comments of my co-panelists. I agree with Anne, you know, similar to her layout and to Gonzalo's layout. We were already kind of this open floor plan, and so folks just felt very comfortable walking down the halls and talking to somebody in legal. If they didn't know the specific issue, who to talk to, they would just come down to legal and try and figure it out there and then. These days, I feel like in addition to business as usual, I'm also having to field a lot of questions that are related to COVID or operational questions that result because of COVID being an issue. And so there are days where I feel like I'm a traffic controller, directing people to the right place and getting their answers answered. There are times where I feel like I'm a matchmaker and connecting people virtually. So it's an interesting place to be at. It's an interesting role, but similar to some of the other work arrangements at the other companies, we had already started moving towards allowing folks to work remotely a couple of days a week. But it's still not the same, right? Because when you can work remotely 2 days out of 5 days a week, you're still in the office on average about 3 days a week and still able to have those face-to-face interactions when it's most efficient to do that, to solve certain types of issues and get certain types of questions answered. But when you're now 100% remote, it makes it a little bit more challenging, especially circumstances that people are having with respect to lack of childcare, schools being closed, kids were formerly off to college now being at home and cooped up with them. So it's definitely a new regime.
Yeah, and they say the introverts are thriving and the extroverts are really suffering right now. We do have a question. So, and it's a great question, and one that we will address actually, and we'll just throw it out there now. So how do you see some of these services that you're receiving from outside counsel changing once you're past this crisis? So we mentioned, or Michael, you mentioned the plethora of things hitting you, and some of you, newsletters and information hitting you. Some of you have talked about how everything you're doing is now through Zoom or Skype, and you're working with your outside counsel that way. one of the big questions that people are asking is which of these changes are going to be permanent and which of these changes are just to get us through this crisis. And I know I'm asking you to prognosticate a little bit, but it'd be interesting if there are things that you're doing differently working with outside law firms now that you would like to see as a permanent change. Anne, you want to start with that one?
Sure. From my end, I think what's been most helpful with our external law firm partners is the fact that they've responded so quickly on offering CLEs that are pertinent to what's going on right now. So last week, for example, we had a CLE given by one of our partner law firms on the force majeure clauses in different agreements and what we need to look out for in this climate and what works and what doesn't work. I think that we shouldn't, and this is of course easier said than done, we shouldn't wait for disaster to strike before we really partner up and understand what these clauses mean in our agreement. So I think that from our perspective and what we're seeing now is how this pandemic affects so many clauses in our agreement, and we may need to sit down and revamp a lot of that language to apply to these circumstances that we would have never thought possible. So I think that, we use precedent because it's been done that way and it's always been done that way until it doesn't work. And I think this is one of those situations where we've realized that a lot of things don't work and we may need to take a step back and really sit down and work with law firms and understand kind of that boilerplate language that everyone just throws in there, and sometimes we don't really negotiate, sometimes we don't really understand, we've just always used this language, so it's fine. So I think that now, sitting down with our partners and really understanding what's going to serve us best in the future in case of another disaster striking or another pandemic hitting us, I think that's going to be really helpful for law firms to be able to come in, explain to us, understand, and redraft some of that language.
So, and along with that question, and Gonzalo, I'll ask you next, besides, are there things that should carry on in the future? What are there things that you first did that to help yourself or your colleagues or your clients that you think would be good to continue doing? So the provision of information, as Anne pointed out, but not waiting for the crisis. Are there other things that you would like to see carried forward after we go back to whatever we're going back to? Gonzalo, you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. Yeah, sure, Terry. What I really, appreciate that all these situations, this has been taking me in a position where I really value the outside counsel who actually has a proactive involvement. And I'm saying, probably I am talking more frequently that I used to be before we went through these situations. So I really appreciate the outside counsel that is actually calling me. Probably I am talking, every week with different outside firms that I'm handling, and particularly in my role, I have responsibilities in many countries across LATAM. So this has been putting me in a situation where, I'm constantly following up on a weekly basis on many issues that arise, because this has been turning out to, new regulations that each individual country has implemented. And this is changing, on a weekly basis. And this has been really helpful in terms of how to organize and be prepared as an anticipatory work, for conducting the business. So this is something that I really appreciate. Instead of me being calling, to the outside counsel, rather to have, instead of having the reactive, reaction, this is a very proactive in terms of having from the outside firm, contacting me, just following up on certain things that are important. And of course, this has opened me opportunity, to request more help and bring up to certain particular issues that are going through.
Great. What about you, Alex? Are there things that you hope get carried forward once the immediate crisis is over, if it is?
Yeah, right. I think that the level of engagement that outside firms are showing is great in terms of wanting to add value and making lives of in-house counsel easier by sharing this information. So I certainly hope that this level of engagement and wanting to partner with in-house counsel continues to be this active. Personally, my inbox has been flooded with a ton of COVID-19 related bulletins. And there are I think at the start of it, it was helpful because it helped orient me on the types of issues that, we should be thinking about and the relevant legal issues and changes, right, that we needed to be keep abreast of. But at this point, I think, there are days where my inbox is so packed with work that needs done, and then I'm getting a ton of these bulletins that are just form bulletins. And I think that the ones that really stand out to me are communications from outside counsel that is tailored, that is specific to the legal and regulatory concerns that my business is concerned with, and they actually provide very thoughtful, meaningful advice, and those are the ones that I pay attention to more. Those are the ones that kind of rise up the top of my inbox, where when I have a couple minutes between calls, I'm going to look at, and I'm going to remember.
Great. Michael, I'm gonna, you actually used to think about this a lot as the head of our strategic communications committee, so feel free to weigh in. And then at the same time, I have another question that I'll start you with, which is, to what extent does the global nature of this crisis impact your need for a more globally coherent approach to the legal advice you get from outside counsel? And this is such a unique global situation.
So, for us and in our business, most of the COVID-19 related issues that we've been dealing with are very local oriented. So our business, we're a service industry, and so we have a lot of employees throughout various jurisdictions that we are dealing with. And the biggest issue we've had to deal with is trying to figure out how all the changes to the unemployment laws and leave laws and all of those things are going to be impacting our operations. And in that situation, it's actually very local. And so for us, I don't know that the current crisis has highlighted the need for the global response as much. But I can see where that would be the case if your business was different than ours and the issues that you were dealing with were not as labor law focused right now as they are for us. Just quickly on the newsletter point, I agree with Alex. If the level of newsletters continued past this, I would probably be annoyed. Right now, I'm finding it so helpful just to see the tidbits on the screen. Even if I don't dive into every single newsletter, I kind of scan the key headlines that are in the newsletter to focus to see if there's something that's specifically related to me, and then quickly move on to the next one. And it's just helpful to know that there are other people thinking about these issues and highlighting things that maybe we haven't thought of that do impact our business. But because we're in crisis mode and we're in response mode and we're just trying to respond to the current issue that's on our plate, we're not necessarily thinking about the 5 issues that could be coming down the pipe. And so those newsletters have been helpful to just highlight, nobody's asked about that yet, but we should be thinking about how we're going to deal with that. So it's certainly a balance, and I agree the more targeted ones are better, but even the general ones I found helpful thus far.
What about the rest of you? Are you seeing the need for a more kind of coherent global approach? Is it firefighting completely right now, or are people looking at, longer term strategies that might fall out from this? Anne, what about at your business?
So I think it's twofold. So on some level, and just to give you kind of a bird's eye view of the biggest challenge that we're facing now, is we have a lot of movies that were set to premiere throughout this time, and theaters are closed. So we're trying to do the analysis in-house of whether it's worth pushing out those movie premieres or releasing them directly to video on demand. The problem is that not each movie works the same way in each market. So for us, it's also very dependent on the specific market. for our cost benefit analysis of waiting or releasing directly to video. For example, Trolls was released this past weekend domestically because it's a huge hit in the US. And I'm sure some of your kids have gone crazy with the Trolls premiere. But for my department, for Latin America, we decided to push that out and wait to exhibit it in theaters when this is all over, because it does so well in theaters in Latin America. So we still need that market specific update, and to echo what some of my fellow panelists were saying before, the updates that provide us a sense of what's happening in our specific targeted markets, for me being Latin America, is very helpful during this time, because I think we're so focused on what's happening to us personally, locally, that we almost forget that even though we're all in the same boat, it's hitting us at different times. So to know what's happening specifically in those regions where we do business, but we're not living in, I think is particularly helpful. So yes and no. We appreciate the global approach, and we also have been, using that to the advantage that it hit Europe before it hit us. So we're trying to learn from that standpoint of what happened in Europe and how we can, service our clients better here, knowing what they're going through over there. But I think still the targeted, specific market approach is what's working best for us.
I see head nodding from the panelists. Does anyone disagree with that approach or have a different perspective? So before we move off the content provision that you're receiving from your outside law firms and other partners, I do have a question that I bet you a lot of people on the call would like to hear. I've seen, of course, we have a resource center where we're sort of curating a lot of that content from our member firms. So we've seen a lot of the topics. Are there topics that you wish people were either writing or speaking on or directing to you that would be a good kind of clue for our audience of where they maybe should be directing their attention? Anybody have any suggestions on that? I know I'm putting you on the spot on this one. And you're all muted, so don't forget to unmute if you do want to add to it. Well, if you think of something, let me know before the end of this program. So we had asked you all to be, not be afraid to be candid, and it'd be interesting to hear from you ways that, besides providing newsletters and the phone calls, are there ways that, are there things that in your relationship with your outside law firms that are maybe challenged right now? Michael dropped off, so not sure, he'll probably log back in, but that are challenged right now in the relationship, there you go, Michael, with your outside law firms? I mean, certainly the big thing we've been hearing a lot is billing and collections is more awkward than normal at these times. So Alex, you want to share your thoughts on how law firms may be helping or hindering at this point, and what clues our audience should be thinking about?
Yeah, I would say, generally speaking, I've been quite impressed by the steps taken by our law firms, which I have thought to be quite proactive in ensuring that the relationship goes on and the work is being done well. There are certain firms out there that have been reaching out and assuring business continuity, saying, so for example, I manage our IP estate, and we do filings globally. So I manage hundreds and thousands of patent applications that are pending, and many of them have actions required at any given time. And so because of how global my practice is, having outside counsel that I work with assure us that they've reached out to the local counsels that they work with to handle our work in those respective jurisdictions. That was a step that was proactive, that was helpful, and it gave me assurance that they've thought through it. They've coordinated with local counsel to make sure that things are going to keep going, and so that I thought was a really great way to handle that relationship, and it's a way to help I think build that business relationship during crisis, which will be memorable, but at the same time having an immediate impact.
Great. How about you, Gonzalo? Are there things that your outside law firms are doing to help or hinder your work right now?
Yes, I really appreciate. I agree with Alex view. What I'm seeing is, there is a great proactivity from outside firms, which is highly appreciated in this moment, and make sure that, as I was mentioning before, there is any type of new rules, new suspensions of date at the courts or at the administrative level. You make sure that we will be complying with the deadlines and be in good shape, which is really important, to make sure in certain areas of practices or current matters that we're dealing through at the court or administrative level. In terms of the billing, what I'm seeing is a lot of solidarity. I mean, there is a way in terms of knowing that process has, in some ways, has been quite a little bit delayed internally in the company, because in terms of getting adjusted with the many situations, particularly when you have to deal with the financial department that has to deal with many other topics, and particularly in our situation, our industry, the business has been considered, as essential. So in some countries, we are really having a demand from the government in terms of duplicating, the efforts in terms for, manufacturing of the medicines, and in terms of from the agriculture perspective, in terms of continuing the operations with their productivity. Particularly in South America, we are doing what we call the contra-season work. So we provide whatever it is, handling the production for eventually install all those seeds in the North American hemisphere. So, when we have summertime, which is actually, we are ending the summertime, in South America. So these increase, to continue, the operations, and this makes us, to have focus on many aspects from the financial standpoint. So when you have to deal with these type of matters in terms of, doing certain processes for billings, I have been seeing a great solidarity from the law firms in terms of, knowing what is happening. I think that we are all in the same boat now, and I truly understand that the law firm has to comply with certain payments internally, to continue their operations as well. But what I'm seeing is that we are all getting these, flexibilities in terms of understanding and try to accommodate, to this new way of living.
How about you, Michael? Are there things that law firms, and I have a bunch of questions that have been posted, but I'll save those for a couple minutes from now. Michael, are you seeing ways that law firms are either helping or hindering your work or what you're trying to accomplish?
So I would echo what everybody else has said in terms of sort of the helpful side of things. I guess the one thing that I've noticed, and it's probably just I'm more in tune to it right now because there's so much going on, is that I think outside of COVID-19, there's still the normal flow of stuff that we're having to deal with on ongoing matters. And I'm finding that I'm more sensitive and in tune to either an email that doesn't highlight for me that something is an urgent nature that I've got to jump on right away, or that doesn't clearly identify a deadline. In the ordinary world before COVID, I could manage that stuff, and I could kind of take the time to look at it and figure out how I needed to fit that in. I'd say in the COVID crisis mode, so much of my day is spent in emergency mode that if I don't have something from the law firm to really catch my attention, to tell me, this has got to get a response, we've got to file this tomorrow, or we have to get a response right away, or this is urgent, or, an email followed up by some sort of a phone call to say, hey, I know you're really busy, but we've got this issue pending. I am probably more concerned than I've been in the past about something slipping through the cracks that way, because I've just got my attention diverted so much beyond my normal day-to-day workload. So that's an area where I think if if folks aren't already doing it as part of their normal practice as outside counsel, just being very proactive and making sure that we stay focused on some of the ordinary matters that we had going before COVID, make sure that we're still focused on those and that those don't get lost.
Yeah, I would
And
have to
I'll ask,
second
go
what
ahead, Alex.
Michael.
Yep.
Yeah, I would have to second what Michael said, and that raises a really good point. And it reminds me of, a couple of instances recently where I've received emails where they provide a deadline, but it doesn't tell me if further deadlines are available. It doesn't tell me the associated costs for taking such deadlines. It doesn't provide any commentary with respect to how critical this particular patent application in this jurisdiction is, and whether there is a particular urgency, particularly in light of the current circumstances, to respond to it quickly, or if it's something that can be deprioritized in view of the other more urgent stuff. So I would encourage outside counsel to start thinking like in-house counsel, and to help us kind of prioritize, triage a lot of those types of tasks that, when it's business as usual, we have a little bit more bandwidth to handle. But during times like this, it's really an opportunity for outside counsel to demonstrate that they understand the pressures that we're under, understand the business considerations that we have to consider in making these decisions. And by anticipating some of these questions that we're likely to ask, it's incredibly helpful, right? So the one example that I was thinking of is I had an application pending in a particular jurisdiction. Turns out there were 10 months of extensions available. It wasn't a case that had gone really far, so there was still quite a bit of time to make the business decision for where we wanted to take the case in that jurisdiction. And the cost for extending it by 10 months was less than $200. And so in that particular instance, I could have saved half an hour's worth of time going back and forth to get the requisite information to make that analysis and say, okay, extend it for 10 months, because it was quite nominal with respect to the fee.
Yeah,
So,
and Terry, sorry, just following on what Alex was mentioning, I think that this is the time where you really appreciate the add value that you have from the outside firm, in terms of hey, what, this is the situation we are going through, which might be the options. Inquire to ask if there is a lack of information in terms from a business perspective. This represents a business priority. This is something that has to be done. At least come with several options in order to be taken. If it is really to put this and this help us in terms of making the final decision. And if when I'm talking about the proactivity, the proactivity means that outside firm has to inquire and not feel that they are getting into much diggy on a business perspective. I think that this is really helpful in terms of having ask me what are the really priorities from a business perspective. And I think that may be helping, to have, the right decision up to these moments where, there is, as we have been indicating, there's attentions coming, every single day, and we have to make the right decision on time,
So I'm hearing that now more than ever, that kind of business legal advice with the overlay of understanding your business and being able to give that kind of business advice is appreciated. And did you want to comment on that? I was going to ask, actually, that was the next question that someone posed that I was going to ask, is to what extent are you looking to outside counsel for scenario planning, for enterprise level advice, and not just legal advice? And would that kind of guidance be helpful, and would it be appreciated?
Right. So just to echo what my fellow panelists were saying before, I think that my colleagues and I are responding best to really targeted, comprehensive updates that are pertinent to our business. And, as outside counsel, you should know what our business is, and you should kind of foresee and help us get up to speed on what's going on. And we're responding well to those emails. Whereas if I get a blanket communication that just pokes me into reminding me of the services that you provide, it's frankly kind of annoying during this time. And I think we're all, our inboxes are all flooded, and we're at capacity, or we're being stretched very thin right now. So that's the type of email that I'm and not look at again. So to the extent that a law firm can send me something that I can use in the day-to-day of managing this crisis is very much appreciated and will be remembered. So then to that extent, Terry, to kind of expand on the question that you're asking now at hand, I definitely foresee a situation where once the dust settles, there's going to be a lot of support that we're going to need from the external law firm. So right now, I think everyone's just treading water, trying to stay afloat. I know from my end, particularly, I'm amending agreements left and right. And everyone, like Gonzalo was saying, everyone is in this together right now, and everyone's being very collaborative and appreciative. But I fear that when the dust settles and it's back to business as usual, that then things might get a little sticky, further down the line, where, we might have been in breach of contract, and it comes back to, well, everyone was getting along, breaking butterflies during the pandemic. And now that, the real business needs settle back in and we get back to normal, we're definitely going to need, external counsel to help us navigate through those specific times. So to the extent that they can almost foresee what's going to be happening then, and be ready to open us with open arms when that time comes, that's going to be greatly appreciated.
Anyone else want to comment on that before I pose another question to you? So we have a question from Spain, and the questioner is saying that in Spain and Europe in general, they suffered at a different level or a different time frame than a lot of others, and that especially the countries that are destinations for tourism, and we're seeing that in a lot of our member firms. But once the outbreak is over and there's a downturn in these economies, as it seems inevitable, there will be a lot of inbound investment incentives. And to the extent that countries like Spain and others are turning into a land for investment opportunities, do any of you foresee a movement or change for investing strategies by your companies in these countries, since they might be more interesting? And this is something that we're seeing a lot of merger and acquisition practice groups discuss as well. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Or is it too soon to tell? Or maybe that's the kind of future thinking you might want your law firms to bring to you, like you were saying. And anybody want to comment? Okay.
Terry, I think that yeah, for sure. I think that we are all hit in this situation from an economic standpoint. So, and I think the countries are the ones who are actually trying, to see how to reactivate the economy. But I think that there is a critical aspect in terms of considering, and I'm talking, from a Latin America perspective, in terms of, for investing and doing, a business, you really need, to have clarity and a predictable, legal scenario. That means that you have to have a legal predictability with, rules, clear rules that clearly, incentivize us as a business, as an industry, to invest in the country and, bring new technologies from a company who actually, like the one that I'm working for, which is investing in research and development of new products for a better life in science. It's critical to have, clear norms in terms of respect of intellectual property rights. So if countries does, you make the incentivize of, making your investment, it has to be with clear norms or regulation that actually go through towards that scenario. And we clearly, as an industry, I think the company is more willing, to invest and bring new technologies. So far, in the jurisdictions that we're going to be launching the products, those products could be, respected and protected. That's my perspective here.
Anyone else want to add to that? So we have a question that I'm not actually surprised to see, but I'll see which one of you want to give it a first shot. And that is, in several sectors, business is getting slow, and some clients are asking law firms to reduce their rates. So do we think that that's going to become a trend in the market, and how is this affecting the fees that you're being charged from law firms, and what are the expectations there? Michael, you smiled, so that means you get to answer this one first.
Well, I mean, I think we're always looking for opportunities to reduce rates, but I mean, I think it's a bit of a catch-22. If you're getting asked to reduce rates, it's probably a good sign, because it means that they value the law firm and want to continue to work with that law firm and just need that help in this time of crisis. You know, I do think as people are trying to manage their budgets and decrease revenues and things in terms of finding ways to keep things going, you may definitely see more of that. You know, I think most of outside counsel will pay the value that they think they get. And so as things rebound, and if you're a valued partner and the rates were deemed reasonable before, I think you'll see that those things can be temporary. But, you know, I think from my perspective, the law firms that respond well to those issues and help us get through those times are going to be viewed more favorably than law firms that don't do that. So I think you will see some more of it, but I think, you know, there's ways to navigate it in a way that's beneficial to the long-term relationship.
What about you, Alex? What do you think on this subject?
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add. I think Michael covers it really well. I agree with that approach. I mean, you know, companies are always going, for the most part, are always going to rely on outside counsel to a certain degree. So there's no way that, you know, we're going to just stop. But in situations like this is an opportunity for firms to really shine in terms of demonstrating their understanding of our business, their legal abilities to really shepherd us through these difficult times. And so, you know, I think if a company is reaching out to you asking to negotiate rates, and it's a longstanding client, I think it's generally a good sign, in that, you know, you're a trusted partner. They want to work with you, and hopefully, you know, as we get through this together, you know, things may change. But I think right now is the time for partnership and to really help one another to get through this together.
I think that's an interesting perspective that you both shared, that if you're being asked to reduce your rates, at least you're being asked to continue in the relationship, and it's a good sign, whereas I think there's sometimes a tendency to think of that as not as positive a sign. Anne, did you want to add anything to that?
No, and I echo everything that Alex and Michael have said to this point. I also would want to add that even if it's just flexibility in payment terms, you know, there's various ways that law firms can partner with their in-house counsel to make it work. So just, you know, we don't need to necessarily think very narrow-minded. There's multiple options that we can take that we could probably make it work. But I definitely think that if a client is coming to you during this time to get your services, it's really an honor, because, you know, in specifically with my company, I think the sentiment is, let's keep this on deck, you know, just us as much as possible during this time, because we are being, you know, very conscious of costs. So if in-house counsel is reaching out to law firms to help out, I definitely think that that's an opportunity that they need to jump on one way or another.
Yeah, and just to echo Anne's point, you know, like, that's a really interesting point with respect to, you know, a company calling you up to negotiate payment terms, because, as you know, right now a lot of employees are working remotely, and so our finance and accounting departments also working remotely, and things perhaps just need to take a little bit more time. It's not that the company is necessarily exhibiting signs of insolvency or, you know, that it's bad. It's just that, hey, we're operating a new regime, and we just need a little bit more flexibility to make it work. We want to get you paid, but at the same time, you know, we're all trying to figure out how best to work in this new world, and there are existing payment terms that we're aware of, and we're just trying to forecast some of these potential issues to ensure that they don't become issues. So Yeah, and back to my earlier comment, like when I said, when a company's reaching out to you with respect to negotiating rates, that's a great thing. That's not exactly my point. My point is, if a company's picking up the phone and calling you and trying to engage with you, that is a positive thing, and it's an opportunity to engage and partner with them.
Gonzalo, how about you? Gonzalo?
Yeah, I fully agree with with my colleagues, as Anne, Alex, and Michael has been indicating. I think that we, from a perspective in terms of, of having a new approach on the rate, that will be much than appreciated. And taking into consideration in countries where, the US dollar or the local currency has been highly devalued. This is, absolutely, really, really appreciated. In terms of, of certain delays, as I was mentioning before, yes, this is the type of solidarity that I'm also, appreciate. That this is, the company is willing, to respect the obligations that has been assumed. But I think that we need, to take into consideration that, there's many people on the internal process when you have to get to deal with the, with the payments, that, people are working remotely. So there is certain things that has been quite a little bit delay. And we are trying to do all efforts. It has been triggering, new mechanisms in terms of making the internals approvals with a faster way, through situations that we were not accustomed to do it. In the past, we were having, at least if these matter comes into an attention, from the finance department, at least you can run into the finance department area and, talk directly with the guy who was dealing with these, and you solve it, in just a couple of minutes. But now this is taking, people is trying to reach you out, to a specific time. And maybe that day, I'm so complicated with the, another conference call, blog. So they're trying, to reschedule that and trying, to reach out to me, on emails and trying to, but I think that this is a way how to understand the particular situation we're going through.
And, I think it's super helpful, and I hope the audience feels the same, to have this kind of bird's eye view into your challenges, that you have a delay because you have to reach out to people in different ways. And you can't just walk down the hall and you can't just talk to your colleagues. And I'm sure that some of the challenges we see law firms facing are also facing all of you, which is the anxiety people are feeling. And you talked about some of the work from home challenges. We have a question before I ask a final question of y'all. We have another question from the audience that I think is kind of interesting. And the question is, would you consider using law firms which you normally don't work with? And how would you feel about law firms reaching out and pitching services during this crisis time? Okay, Michael, you smiled again. You get to go first.
So the answer to the first part of the question is I'm always willing to look at new law firms. The answer to the second part of the question is I don't have time for pitches right now. So, if you want to send me a newsletter or something to put you on my radar, I think that would be fine. But, some sort of an effort to aggressively set up a meeting or have some sort of a dialogue about the services the firm can provide on a going forward basis, I think would probably be best tabled for, at least a month or so until we'll see where this thing goes. If there's a unique service that the law firm provides that potentially impacts my business and is COVID related that, might be of use to me, then again, some sort of an email highlighting that in a way that's sort of least invasive would be fine. But beyond that, I probably wouldn't be highly receptive to pitches at the moment.
Anybody feel differently? Okay. So
I think that these are the moments, Terry, I think that these are the moments where, are critical in terms of knowing, how the responses that you were looking for from the outside firm is working or not, and I agree with Michael. Maybe this is not the moment in terms of, looking for different alternatives, but maybe, after we're going through this, that might be the situation where, you make a conclusion in terms of how things has been working out, with the current legal advice, and that what triggers, to look for different alternatives. Up to now, I fully agree with him. We are not in a position, in terms of, unless we are in a crisis that makes, us to start looking for an immediate assistance, outside. But yes, I agree with his approach on that.
Alex or Ann, do you have anything on that question you want to add?
No, I think I definitely echoed the sentiments of Gonzalo and Michael. And kind of to touch on a point that we covered earlier, to the extent that a new law firm reaches out with a very, comprehensive market update or something specifically COVID related that would really catch our attention, I think that is the kind of communication that we'd be open to at this point from a new law firm. But in terms of generating new business, again, because the sentiment is let's keep costs down just to bring someone up to speed new during this time, I just don't think it's feasible. But again, once this passes and new issues arise, I think that would definitely be an important time for law firms to reach out, because things may not have gone well with partners that we're used to working with during this time. So there's definitely going to be, some new players on the market that are going to be very open to that new business once this pandemic passes.
I was going to ask a wrap-up question, but I kind of like one that was just posed instead. So we'll maybe wrap up. I'll combine it with mine because we are coming down to the end, and we really appreciate you taking so much time with us. So the question that was posed is, will this crisis change how you evaluate your law firm partners? And do you see your business consolidating or expanding the number of firms that you use after the crisis subsides? I was going to ask if you had any final advice for outside law firms. So maybe you could combine what you think you might do in the future, if you think you might have a different approach, if you know yet, and any last bit of advice for people. So Alex, you want to start?
Sure. I think we've covered aspects of this question quite well throughout this past hour. I think, again, just to reiterate, I think now is the time for firms to really shine and demonstrate a deep understanding of our business, to be mindful of the pressures that we're under, and learning how we need a partner to be at this time. So again, I don't think that this is a time to be out there hunting necessarily for new work, but instead to really entrench yourself in your client's business, to demonstrate an understanding, a care for them, and to be a true partner. Because at the end of it, people will be evaluating these relationships and how things have gone, look at it quite critically, and make decisions based off that experience over, the next however many months. So.
Gonzalo, how about you?
We are going through, as from my company perspective, we're going through in an interesting process, because we are trying, after the acquisition from Bayer to Monsanto, we are screening, all the law firms that has been, working with both companies. So we are going through in a process of making internal evaluations into which is a firm that we will be taking as a basis for outside counsel legal advice. But clearly, I think that as Alex mentioned before, I think that we cover some of the critical aspects that in this particular moment, those are the times where, the current firms are showing, their kind abilities, their great add value that we as internal counsels, we look for. So again, I think that is if there is an opportunity for a change, of course, will be handled, for sure in the near future.
Great. Michael and Ann, I don't want to cut you off from answering, but do you have anything that you'd like to say that maybe one of the others hasn't said? Okay. So we have come to our hour, and we are going to wrap this up. I just really wanted to thank our panelists, and also you've seen Tim Shannon's name on the screen. He's been working behind the scenes to assist me. Tim is TerraLex's Chief Business Officer, and someone whose name you don't see but also has been helpful on this is Nicole Rudner, who's our Director of Practice Groups and Industry Sector Team. So I just want to make sure I said thank you to them. Panelists, thank you so much. I'm sure that our audience got some great insights from your comments, and we hope that you have continued success and stay well during this interesting time in our lives. Thank you very much. And thank you to our audience.
Thanks, Terry.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Terry. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.